Hello, welcome to the CIRS Healing Collective expert guest video series. I'm Jenny Johnson, the host and facilitator of the CIRS Healing Collective, which has been a resource for aspiring CIRS overcomers to share and connect from around the world since 2020. I'm a shoemaker proficiency partner and CIRS coach, and most importantly, an overcomer myself. What you're about to see is a 10-minute excerpt from a 90-minute group discussion that members of the CIRS Healing Collective got to have live with this expert guest. If you would like to see the full 90-minute replay, come on over to the CIRS Healing Collective. We have a robust video library from the past 5 or 6 years of so many expert guests. Better yet, you'll be able to join our future monthly live discussions with experts to come. We'd love to have you. Here we go. So this is a CIRS Healing Collective special guest session, and our guest this month is Dr. Anil Bajnath. And this is such a special treat. I know you hear me say that a lot. I get really excited about the special guests that I bring to you guys. But I'm particularly excited about Dr. Bajnath, really because I just think he's he's a really cool guy. We met each other, I guess it was September of 2022, and Dr. Shoemaker hosted a gathering actually at his house for the surviving mold professional community. And we had a conference, but then he also invited us to his house to see his gardens and his land and his ponds and his home. And Dr. Heyman made this amazing paella for everybody. Dr. Bajnath that. Dr. Bajnath is a CIRS doctor who actually works at the Virginia Center for Health and Wellness with Dr. Heyman. But he was there, and that's where I got to first meet him at Dr. Shoemaker's house. And one of the things that I connected with Dr. Bajnath on is this intersection of chronic illness, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and the importance of that. And then all of these fun ideas that come with longevity medicine and anti-aging and lifestyle medicine, all the biohacks, stuff that I bring to you guys in Salugenics, Sunday Salugenics, and way beyond. And so he's just a wealth of information in longevity medicine, but he's a CIRS doctor too. And so he's the perfect go-between to kind of help us figure out what do we need to be thinking about as CIRS patients as far as the aging process? And what are some of the cool longevity hacks that maybe we hear about from people like Mark Hyman or, on various conferences and summits? What are some of those tools and hacks that may be more relevant to the CIRS patient population than others? And maybe safer for us to use when we're still in an active inflammatory state than maybe ones that we would be more prone to look into later once we're a little bit better. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about.
Honestly, my mission in life is to change the narrative of medicine, right? Yeah. So what I just described to you is a future of medicine, looking at things through the longevity lens, focusing on health and wellness and cultivating resiliency, but more so bringing about this new approach to precision medicine, because the NIH defines precision medicine as the interface of environment, lifestyle, and biology. To me, that sounds like really good medicine, right? So I've actually formed the American Board of Precision Medicine. And we're in the process of, I have a bunch of docs around the country and world that we're putting together educational curriculum for MDs and DOs to become trained and certified in this way of thinking, connecting the molecular dots using multi-omics, systems biology, and network analysis so that we could deliver more precision, personalized medicine. So, the president and CEO. So this is
like functional medicine on steroids, really using new we'll say lab tools, really new ways of looking even deeper into the body to see how things can be personalized beyond just looking for the root cause of maybe an illness, but even preventive stuff and whole person, whole system stuff and interconnected. So would that be fair to say functional medicine on steroids, personalized preventive medicine?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Steroids or a psychedelic, however you want to see it. It's definitely taking it to another level.
Well, I love what you brought up about like the 401k and how we can be making deposits into our health and wellness, deposits into our longevity with certain things that we do and don't do. And then we can be taking withdrawals. We can be basically like sneaking little pieces away from our ultimate health and well-being and longevity with other things that we do or don't do, or things that aren't even in our control. Like, we walk into the grocery store and there's a massive mold exposure and maybe there's a tiny speck that gets taken away from our 401k. But tell us a little bit more about, like, if someone's on the CIRS journey and maybe they're not working with a clinician, at least not yet, who's doing all of these really cool metabolomics and fancy personalized medicine testing yet, are there some things that are pretty generic for like most people that would feel accessible to us as CIRS patients, that you could remind us this matters? Like, this not only is going to help your CIRS journey, but this is going to help your long-term wellness. What would some of those we'll call them like generic lifestyle or supplement or medications be that are helpful for almost everybody?
Yeah, I think, it goes back to the foundational, ingredients needed for healing, and that is light, sound, sleep, nourishment, right? And it goes on multiple levels. I really think the mindset is really, really important. And I think starting with, a mindset reset is sometimes very important for when we're in this state of despair and vulnerability, because we don't know what's going on when we have, all these crazy symptoms and nobody understands what's going on. And then it turns out, oh my goodness, I'm in the middle of a CIRS flare, so to speak. And I think, it's taking a step back, taking that deep breath, putting yourself in the right headspace, because without the right headspace, none of this is going to work, right?
Yeah.
And not becoming obsessive, not becoming neurotic, but becoming aware,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Making sure you're able to put yourself in the right environment, right? Somehow, even if that means, I'm sure there's some, people in the call that can relate to this, that, some people spend more time outdoors, right? In nature, away from, the home that could be, poisoning them literally, right? So I think prioritizing good air, good light, good sound, and sound is
Light.
very
So when you
important.
say light, is this like the light therapy that you're talking about, or sunlight?
Sun gazing, sun
All of the
gazing.
factors of of the when and how of light.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to go spend, hundreds of bucks on these red lights. You could just go outside, be in nature,
Yeah.
ground yourself.
Okay.
You get cold exposure, but if you got heavy metals in your mouth and you got, mercury leaching into your system, and that's causing genomic instability and, mitochondrial dysfunction and everything else, that needs to be addressed, right? If you have, leaky gut syndrome, and we know that, the chronic inflammation, the low MSH, increased gut permeability, and how that could influence the leaky gut syndrome through that centralized kind of inflammatory mechanism, still needs to be addressed. So I think that they're all important. And I mean, loss of proteostasis, for example, if we're not sleeping well, right, and we don't have that lymphatic system working at nighttime, that hydraulic pump that washes away all the accumulated proteins in your central nervous system, that's going to affect your ability to concentrate, think, and perform, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's really important. So, they're all interconnected. And,
Right.
so to me, I think as a person, biotoxin exposure is just one component to the multitudes
Yeah.
of different things that are attacking us from a biological aging process. But
Right.
arguably, chronic inflammation being the most important, hallmark that needs to be addressed. But then when you start dissecting what chronic inflammation is and where it's coming from, it's not just one thing, right? It's like a multitude of things,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I heard you mention a variety of things, that are maybe in our court. You talked about the way that we assimilate food and the timing of our food as something that may be important. So how we eat. You talked about sleep being important for draining junk out of our brain. You talked about the importance of not just biotoxin exposure, but other environmental toxicants that can bother our, I think, our mitochondria, heavy metals and other environmental toxicants. So there's something there. Um, I'd love for maybe, would you start to kind of get into what some of the, we'll call them biohacks or the tools. What are some of the tools that might be available to us as CIRS patients, and maybe the lowest hanging fruit, like the most relevant, but like the simplest ones for folks who are already, we're in the midst of chronic fatigue and financial overwhelm and all of that. But what are some of let's start with lowest hanging fruit, maybe things that we can do to mitigate CIRS impact on our aging process, and then maybe you can get into some of the advanced tools after that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, yeah, and I think especially with within the context of CIRS in as it relates to biotoxin exposure, I think the hardest part of this entire process is step number one.
Yeah.
Ensuring you're in a medically safe and sound environment for which you're not going to react to. And honestly, at that, those mitigation tools beyond remediation, like ear scrubbers and air purifiers and all these different things to make sure your ear is kind of not harboring a high spore burden is very important in this entire equation, right? More specifically. But I also think that, having clean water, like a lot of people, you can't neglect the trace amounts of all these different industrial compounds that are found in drinking tap water. So I think, having clean water, healthy food, all that stuff's very important, if you're eating McDonald's every day and you're having all these hydrogenated oils and really bad fats and so forth, that also influences your mitochondrial performance. So in regards to the hacks per se, step number one, and with this entire protocol is essential, right? And what does that look like? Encapsulating the crawl space and making sure there's no water damage, and working with as we love Larry Shorts. I love Larry. I think he's a sweetheart. He's a great person. And my experience with him, I've done a home investigation. He's like a doctor for your house. I'm sure you guys could all relate to this. You're having somebody come in and they're looking at where the infrastructural vulnerabilities are in the home and how that's influencing, the potential, exposure to water, penetration and exposure to, allow for this growth and proliferation to take place amongst these different, vulnerabilities within the infrastructure in the house. So from a CIRS perspective, I think number one is going to be step number one, right? Is just dialing in that whole equation. Now, the fun stuff in regards to hey, what are some of the different things that you could, that theoretically could be beneficial? Well, again, there's no randomized controlled trial, double-blinded placebo studies to validate some of the things that I'm saying, but it's going to be more anecdotal by association. So, for example, I'm a huge fan of photobiomodulation. Right. Photobiomodulation or light therapy has been shown to actually work on a molecular level that influences mitochondrial function. So at the heart of what we're dealing with is a mitochondrial insult from a cell danger response, trying to help support the mitochondria in any shape or form, I think is beneficial. Right. One of the things that I think I've seen anecdotally help individuals suffering from neurodegeneration on top of CIRS, because as you may know, the Bredesen protocol that deals with reversing Alzheimer's is also embracing and addressing CIRS and mold exposure and so forth as one of the slivers in regards to preserving brain health, right? So I think it just one little sliver, but one of the things that I've seen anecdotally again is for example, transcranial photobiomodulation. I've had a lot of patients come to me after using some of these therapies and report that they have a tremendous improvement in their cognitive and brain health. So I think that's really important,
Okay, so pause there. This is huge. All right, so you talked about light therapy. Transcranial photobiomodulation is an example of that, specific to it's a cap that you could put on your brain, maybe like the Light or something like that. But this is for cognitive impairment specifically. and whether you've got like maybe pre-dementia, or can this even work for like CIRS related brain fog? This kind of the photobiomodulation for our head?
So I've had a handful of patients that have a combination of things, the CIRS inflammatory proteomic and transcriptomic signature, but also they have a co-diagnosis of Alzheimer's, right?
Oh,
And they're like, look, time is tissue. I need to do everything that I'm doing. I'm following the Bredesen, I'm following the shoemaker, I'm doing, all of this, what else can I do? And I have a handful of patients that have used whether the V light, which is transphenytoidally, or the neuronic transcranial photobiomodulation to help support their cognitive health and abilities. And they've come back and said, you know what? It's subtle, but I notice a sense of clarity and improve, just overall, just cognitive health. So,
yeah,
and more words, so that's something, again, anecdotal, that a handful of patients that have tried this come back to me. But
yeah.
also you got to keep in mind, they're also hitting things on other angles. So they're maybe doing
Right. They're not
IV
just
therapy.
doing that as like a band-aid, they're doing all the other things too. Right.
Yeah, they're supporting their, micronutrient status, right, by looking at like a SpectraCell or a NutriVal or a metabolomics test. There's a bunch of different tests out there that break down the different vitamins and minerals and making sure that, they're optimizing those deficiencies, micronutrient deficiencies,